Jealousy is always connected to a root impulse or desire that is unfulfilled, then a disappointment and frustration about that lack of fulfillment, then a personal blame about the frustration, what group or what individual is being blamed for the results that have been produced. One can be jealous toward an individual or a group, but there is always some target for blame, like even just a cat. So frustration doesn't require blame, but once we move on to blame, that implies there's some party, some partiality, some partisan vilification or blaming of some particular group. And then there's a victim of the villain. If there's a victim, there has to be a villain. So some victim, once someone identifies themselves as a victim, then they have to identify some other villain. It could be a group, it could be an individual. So if I label you as preventing me from having what I do not have, but I'm attracted to having, that is blaming. With or without jealousy, if I label you as preventing me from what's happening, that's blaming. But jealousy is a little bit different. We'll get to that next. If I perceive you as actually having what I'm attracted to having, or if I perceive that you are even a possible threat to me accessing it or maintaining access to it, then that would be full-on jealousy. Not just blame, but jealousy. And that's going to be right up against the possibility of rage. So jealousy, and I'll back up. So blame could imply anger. I'm disappointed at your results, and I'm angry about this. But there doesn't need to be rage or contempt. Blame can have a moderate degree of anger. There can be, even somebody raises their voice in frustration or whatever, and they say, you know what, I identify you as the one at issue here. But to get to jealousy and rage, there's a more complex process involved to build up even an additional amount of energy to have burst out suddenly. There has to be some latent energy bursting out for there to be rage. Anger itself will just voice itself, and there it is, it's anger. But if you have a bunch of repressed anger, then you can have, because of blame and resentment, then you can have jealousy and rage because of that repressed anger. So jealousy implies fixation, resentment, contempt, and vilification. Once someone is targeted for blame, that does not require any additional criticism. They're with simple blame, there can even be a direct request made for some compensation or reparations. I'm angry that you caused me to drop this gallon of milk. I want you to get me another gallon of milk right now. Will you do that? So that's not jealousy. That's not rage. There is blame. But that's just, resolves into a request. However, once the blame is made into a jealous vilification of character assassination, how this person is like for the future, for the present, for the past, just how they are eternally, once there's that vilification or demonizing, then a long list of other patterns or events can be referenced as evidence of not just blame, but of villainy or evil. In fact, things can be made up, like I presume that the reason that you are being so nice is because blah, 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 blah. So if somebody's being nice and there's this ongoing vilification, if they're identified as a villain, then whatever they do is going to be interpreted through that filter of this presumption about how they are, this creation of them as an enemy, as a person to blame for the frustration and so forth of the one doing the blaming. So the perceived villainy of the enemy, the target of the jealousy, can be used to justify a variety of forms of revenge or punishment. Punishment is distinct from compensation, which involves a transfer of value. Like in the example I gave before, I say, you caused me to drop this, and lose or waste this gallon of water. I want you to give me a gallon of water. Go get one and give it to me. So nothing's destroyed. There's just a accessing of resource and transferring of resource. That's compensation. Punishment is different. Punishment may be the inflicting of physical pain for no purpose other than to, encourage a distance between the various parties, like to teach them a lesson and keep them away. Obviously, someone can be physically killed, and then there's also the destruction of property. So those are some normal punishments, like if somebody just bashes the window of a car or pokes a hole in someone's tire, not for any other purpose, but as punishment, just to be to inconvenience someone else, or maybe more than just inconvenience them, but anyway, at least to inconvenience them. It's always calling for attention. The person punishing for inconvenience wants the attention of the person being punished, because there's that jealousy. And behind jealousy, you may have kind of sorted this out already for yourself. Behind that jealousy, there's some kind of attraction. There's actually some kind of attraction when there's some blame. So the attraction is not necessarily, okay, maybe I'm complicating things a little bit right now by introducing this. I'll say it more clearly later. But if I'm attracted to going to California and someone else is there now or is about to go there, then whatever I do in relation to them is a spin-off or a result of my underlying attraction to go to California, for instance. So I'm going to interrupt them because they're, I want them to give attention to me, and maybe they'll say, hey, I'm going, do you want to go with me? I know that that's somewhat ridiculous, but there's always some element of attraction behind a punishment, as distinct from just again, I talk about inflicting physical pain or destruction of property. Maybe I'm oversimplifying here, but there's destruction of property to punish, and then there's destruction of property to just it's like if you cut down a tree, that isn't necessarily, if you burn it up, you're trying to interfere with someone else's use of it. You're trying to get their attention. Again, that's more in the realm of punishment. I'm not talking about I cut down a tree because I want firewood, and maybe whatever. So I'll move on. So I am back to reading the blog. I have not mentioned this yet, so I'll also note here that jealous bitterness is also the source of ridicule and arguing. All ridicule and arguing have some underlying energy and pressure and tension. To anxiously argue against an idea or to ridicule it desperately is an expression of a latent bitterness. I'm bitter, and I'm going to take it out in arguing with somebody, or I'm going to take it out on someone and ridicule them. So that bitterness is latent, just like when I'm complaining about the evil cat chasing the victimized squirrel. That's a pre-existing bitterness. The event happens, and then I'm bitterly complaining about the cat. Or when I'm whining about the annoying clouds ruining my plans. I was already tense or frustrated to be blaming clouds about ruining my plans. Are the clouds annoying? Remember the annoying clouds that are ruining my plans? Are the clouds annoying inherently? Or was I already irritable and annoyed, and then the clouds showed up, and I called them, or I labeled them annoying clouds? So here is a long sequence of how jealousy can arise and resolve, and I insert some comments about the kinds of things that people might say at these various stages. So the long sequence of how jealousy can arise and resolve. Innocence. Innocence will be there throughout this whole process, the foundation of the whole process is innocence. Then attraction, some attraction. Maybe I want to go to California, whatever. Maybe I want to eat some squirrel. I don't know, whatever. Then there's some hope. Hope implies, at some point, a sense of a method for producing the result that I'm attracted to. So there's next stage, some reflective presumption. It's just inevitable that I have presumptions. I don't know that I'm actually going to talk about that or give examples of that at any point here, but I think you'll be able to get the logic of this as I go on. So there's innocence, then attraction, then hope, then, like in a certain method, then a reflexive presumption. Basically just the labeling of a particular method or possibility as being one that could work to produce the thing I'm attracted to, the result I'm attracted to. So there's a reflexive presumption, and then there's some action based on that presumption, some method used. And then confusion. What is that? Confusion. It's based on a lack of awareness about which presumption was inaccurate. Confusion is distinct from ignorance, like not knowing something. Confusion is being able to identify something a little bit, but not necessarily accurately identifying it. Confusing one thing for another thing. The example I like to give is there's a jar with a label on it, and the label says pickles. What's inside the jar? You don't know. There's just a label on it that says pickles, but it could be an empty jar. There could be pickles in it. It could be peanut butter in it. The label or the labeling is distinct from the contents of the jar. So if we confuse a label for something else, that is confusing one thing for another thing. So there's some presumption made, and that presumption can be inaccurate, and if we're unaware of the inaccurate presumption, then we can be confused. That's very different from being surprised. Oh, here's something I did not expect. If there's something contrary to an expectation, that's what we could call confusion. Now, when this confusion arises, then another thing is possible. This whole sequence doesn't have to go in the way I'm saying it, but if it goes quote-unquote badly, then it will go in this way. The confusion, instead of being resolved, instead of asking for help or figuring out quickly or realizing what's going on, confusion can lead to disappointment, like sadness, sorrow. That can lead, and also sorrow is where I'd say I'm sorry, as in guilt. I'll talk about guilt more later. Disappointment is that next stage after confusion. Then after disappointment can come desperation. Could be panicked, so anxious, agonizing, worrying. Then, and I just have worry later, but you can, these can overlap a little bit. Disappointment, then desperation, then frustration. Why is there frustration? Because I keep using the method that I already know is unlikely to work, but I keep trying it. I do it faster. I do it more. Continued attempts to operate based on an inaccurate presumption or an inappropriate method. Unsatisfying method. So, why do I keep doing that? Because of the desperation. I have this anxiety, this urgency. So I keep trying something that's not working. I do it faster, I do it more, and then I blame because the method isn't producing the result I want, and it should be because of my presumption about the result I'm going to get from that method. So I blame someone or some group. Then I worry a lot. I agonize. Once someone else is blamed as responsible, as the one who is powerful, I'm saying I don't have any influence here. Then it's inevitable that I'm going to worry about possible future disappointment because I have no power according to my own way of relating to something. I'm saying, oh, here's a disappointing result. I have a method that should work, but it's not, and it's their fault. And then I'm ongoingly worried about how do I remove these villains from the world? How do I fix reality to fit my presumptions? That is worrying or that leads to worrying. Next, how do I fix reality to remove these people who are blocking me from what otherwise would work fine? Jealousy. That's where jealousy comes in. Someone has been blamed as responsible. I'm worried about what I'm going to do. I'm worried about future disappointment. I'm going to deal with my future disappointment, my expected future disappointment, by being jealous. I don't have what I want, and I'm never gonna. And then here's somebody else get something similar to what I want, or they might be blocking me from what I want. I'm starting to get not just jealous, but mad. They have or might have what I value, and then I'm going to get into a rage, potentially. I'm going to have contempt for them. That's possible. I may even get into shame. Not just shaming them, but also an internal shame. My life should not be shaming them, but also an internal shame. My life should not even be like this. We could also use a term like depression right there around shame. Another stage is denial. Excuse me, but I'm a very positive person, okay? That is why I hate people who are so freaking negative that I just want to strangle them. Okay? That's denial. That's not what I call positivity, the comments that I just stated. Somebody can label themselves as positive. They can be confusing themselves for a positive person when in fact they're not. That's just an identity or a label that they have for themselves. So there can be that denial. My life should not be like this, but it's perfect. No, I'm okay. It's fine. Yeah, it's fine as long as you don't mention any negative subjects, because if you do, I'll get pissed. And I'll get frustrated. I wasn't frustrated until you came along. So that's all denial, contempt. And again, it goes back to somebody else has the thing I want. That can be a factor. All right, next after denial is repulsion. Naturally, those freaking negative people, I just can't stand to be around them. I just dislike them. It's common sense. I'm repelled by them. They are repulsive. Not I'm repelled by them, but they are repulsive. There's that labeling. It doesn't have to be a vilification in that case, but typically there was a vilification sometime earlier, and then it just resolves, and then it just kind of is layered over with just straight up repulsion. So after repulsion, though, can come, here's a twist, humility. Wait, I still have not produced the experience that I'm still attracted to. And about all these people who call themselves positive, these positive thinkers, like I've been calling myself, well, why are they all so focused on what other people are doing or not doing or how things should be instead of how things are? What's the presumption that we have been insisting must be accurate? That's moving away from arrogance and so forth towards humility. Arrogance is always based on fear. I didn't refer to arrogance previously, but the whole thing of blaming someone, jealousy, those are all forms of arrogance. So what's the presumption that we have been insisting must be accurate? If I start to entertain a question like that, that's humility. It could be that I'm humiliated somehow, and that's what leads to questioning. But whatever the process is in detail, once I start to question whether my methods were the best choices, that's starting to get back into the realm of functionality. What presumptions did I have? What preoccupations did I have? That kind of thing. Next is maturity. After humility, maturity. Maybe I made an error in perception somewhere. Maybe I could have used a better method. And maybe that error in perception led to my past confusion. Maybe it wasn't someone else's fault. Maybe it was just a natural result of an error in perception. I thought that the label on the jar meant that what the label said would be what was in the jar. Oh, I made a mistake. Okay, now I get it. So that's, maturity is just recognizing the possibility of a perceptual error, of one's own responsibility. Maybe the people I vilified were never the core issue. Maybe it was something that I'm responsible for. So that's what I'm calling maturity. We may not be clear yet about the specific detail, just, okay, it's possible that I was responsible for that and that I am now responsible for the future, the present, and so on. Next could come forgiveness. I am really sorry that you did such horrible things to me and that you were such an evil person. No, I'm just kidding. I apologize for blaming you for my disappointment with the results that my behaviors produced. I really apologize. I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? That's forgiveness. Again, not just forgiving the other person, but asking forgiveness. I apologize for blaming you. I apologize for how I related to you, how I labeled you. Clarity. After forgiveness, clarity can arise. Clarity does involve a specific insight. Wow, so that was the inaccurate perception. That's it? That's all? That's it? That is it. That is just so ridiculously simple. I can totally understand how that presumption led naturally to everything else. It's kind of amazing that I did not notice that before, huh? When I had my hand covering my eyes, I didn't even see that the clouds and the sunlight, right? Okay, so after clarity can come gratitude. And then after gratitude, not just for the people, but for the whole process. After gratitude can come innocence, recognition of an inherent, intrinsic, eternal innocence that's been there fundamentally through the whole process of reflection, of reflexive reflex, reaction, reflex, reflex. Da, da, da. Okay, so that's the long version of all the sequence. It's quite long. I'm going to give a shorter version of the whole process of from innocence that's unrecognized to the recognition of innocence. It has much less precision than what I said before, the long thing, because it's clumping a bunch. Okay, I mentioned empathy a minute ago. You may also notice that while jealous, blame, and rage notably lack empathy for others, because there's all this emphasis on, look at what a victim I am here, okay? There's no empathy in that jealous, blame, and rage, and so on. Well, in contrast to that, humility includes empathy. I'm looking at all these people who are all claiming to be victims, and after 2, 30, 659, eventually I'm like, wait a minute, there's a pattern. There's not one victim. There's a whole process of victimization. And while that's true, while there's power differentials in what we can call victimization, there's also the possibility of people taking new actions, of learning, of accepting responsibility or taking responsibility. There's a lot of possibilities, but first of all, there's a lot of people who are suffering and are, complaining and who are hurting and emotionally, they're blaming others and they're raging and they're experiencing contempt. And if I really get that wow, there's a whole lot of people that are feeling, just dejected and ashamed of the results they've got, well, that can interrupt my own attention to my own shame about the results I've got or that I haven't got. So other people can be me recognizing a similar process in other people can be a part of my process of growing and maturing. My empathy for them arises at some point. Maybe it's not for all the people involved. Maybe I'm not empathetic for everyone. I still blame some people, but empathy starts to creep in. And when that happens, that is distinctive. And there is a time prior to that when empathy will be very limited. And so when I start to have empathy for other people who have a similar situation or a similar experience to me, that even looking at what is happening for other people involves some courage, because it's getting into some stuff that may be sensitive for me, some shame. So there's a courage there that goes along with that empathy, and the empathy can lead to insights and humility and so on, or can go along with humility. So what actually interrupts one's own preoccupation with blaming can be to notice the preoccupied blaming by vast numbers of other people, to see the results they're getting from their blaming. I see their suffering. I recognize the innocence that is present through the entire sequence of reflexes. The innocently reflective disappointment, innocently reflective blaming, innocently reflective denial, and so on. It's all innocently reflexive. Once I see that, that's a major breakthrough. I see the fundamental innocence of the sinning and of the sinner. And if I see that one time, and then 3 times, and then 40 times, I start to get, this is not isolated cases. This is the pattern. Fundamental innocence is always there. Every form of sin and every sinner is involved in a reflexive, automatic process based on, I have referred to before, based on a mistaken presumption, but based on a lack of clarity. Let's call it that. A lack of clarity, a lack of precision in their language. They label something wrong. Oh, that's a jar of pickles. Why? Because it says pickles on the label, and it must be a jar of pickles. Well, that's a lack of precision. I'm taking the label to be a literally accurate representation or symbol of what is inside the contents of that jar. So that's just a lack of precision, a lack of clarity. And it's reflexive, it's automatic. They couldn't have done anything different. Or they would have. They wouldn't have been so frustrated. People who are frustrated aren't doing it on purpose. They're doing it reflexively, innocently. To the pure, all things are pure. But to those who are corrupted and do not believe, nothing is pure. In fact, both their minds and consciences are corrupted. That's from Titus 1:15, from the New Testament of the Christian branch of monotheistic spirituality. So as I noted before, I mentioned guilt, and I was going to say more about it. What is guilt? There's a picture of a squirrel as well as a picture of a cat, and the cat is just, enjoying itself blissfully, relaxing or whatever, and then there's a squirrel that's actually dead, clearly. So what is guilt? We can certainly have this sense of, oh no, nothing should die. Well, I put that picture next to the section on guilt for a reason. Let's look at guilt. Guilt is when I relate to something as if there's something fundamentally disturbing about it. If I'm experiencing it as disturbing to me, I'm relating to it as disturbing. It is disturbing for me. Like some action I took is disturbing to me, or some result that I produced is disturbing to me. Something I witness is disturbing, and I can feel guilty or tense and anxious just from witnessing something. Oh, did I do that? Oh, was I involved in? Oh no, I wasn't involved in that. No, right? There can be guilt right there as a reflex. Guilt is a disturbance. It's a dis-ease or anxiety or a self-directed ill will. And it can be covered and projected and so on. It can be hidden, obscured. But it's that underlying anxiety, that disturbance. The self-directed ill will often gets projected onto others, a group, a individual. Before I can select someone to blame for anything, I must have a sense of frustration and desperation about the thing that I'm going to blame somebody on, because there's got to be something wrong with it. It's disturbing, and then I'm going to look for somebody to blame for disturbing me. And what's happening when I'm looking for someone to blame for disturbing me, and then I talk about how they're to blame, I'm going around and I'm socializing with people, and I'm looking for who can be with my disturbance, who can be with my anxiety. So that's the functionality of blaming. I don't mention that in the writing there, but kind of a nice little twist is to be aware that the process of blaming has one go out and socialize and talk to other people who can be with that disturbance, maybe who agree with the disturbance or have some similar experience of disturbance. So you get a bunch of people together who have that same kind of disturbance or same kind of blame or whatever, and they eventually can see the pattern of blaming. That's how they learn, is by collecting into little herds like that. So before I select someone to blame for anything, I must have a sense of frustration and desperation about that thing. I'm not going to blame people on things. I'm not going to blame people about things that I like. Right? There is a flip side to all of this, where I can celebrate a particular person as the, I have a fixation on someone as the great hero. For me to have that fixation on a particular hero, I have to have an underlying worry and insecurity. I don't reference that in this writing, but just make a note if you care. When I'm worried, that's the only time I'm interested in a savior, a hero, a final solution. Desperation has to do with being scared, right? With guilt. Desperation's like panic. Panic's like disturbance. Guilt is that disturbance. I don't want anybody to know my role in this. I don't even want to consider that I might have had a role in this, because I might be guilty and I'm scared. I don't want anybody to see that I don't know how to produce the result I want. I don't want them to know I'm naive. I don't want them to know I'm immature, that I'm not capable. So if I want to cover the pretense that I'm like really capable of something, then why? What if I'm not capable? What if I just learn and become capable? Why is it a problem if I'm not capable? There's that fear, that anxiety, that desperation, even panic, paranoia in the background. So guilt is the fear of revealing some underlying attraction or impulse of fully experiencing some pleasure. Guilt is a fear of fully experiencing some pleasure. Guilt is always about pleasure. Guilt is being terrified of pleasure or disturbed by the possibility of pleasure. That's kind of weird, kind of interesting. I want somebody to, save me from my fixation, my attraction, my attention to some pleasure, some possible pleasure. That's a weird twist. The villain keeps me from it, and the savior that's always in the distance, always in the future, always, remote, that savior is the other side of that equation of distancing myself from the pleasure, distancing myself from the outcome. I'm waiting on the savior very patiently. I'm frustrated and I'm desperate and I'm scared, to death. But at least I know that I have a savior, and again, that's a fine way to operate. That's appropriate. It's a reflexive, innocent thing to have that association with a savior. And obviously, there can be people who are helpful to us, people who guide us, people who are supportive to us, people to whom we're attracted, to whom we want to spend time. But we to label them the Savior is a little different than a Savior. In the Old Testament, it says God, or Yahweh, is the Lord, is the only Savior. There is no other Savior. There is no other power. There is no other Almighty but the Almighty. So guilt is always about pleasure. How do we learn this guilt? In the midst of a culture of people who are already guilty about their own attractions to pleasure, any innocent arrival, any person arriving into that culture, will be programmed with a terror for pleasure, a lasting panic A disturbance, a reflexive guilt. We could call that hell. I'm such a victim here, because seriously, I would be in heaven if it just were not for blank, fill in the blank there, whoever I blame, who is totally ruining my perfect life forever by that one thing they did a long time ago that is blocking me now from that thing that I'm really attracted to, but I'm terrified of actually experiencing or even admitting. That is hell. I'm such a victim here because of the villain, because of the past, because of the powerlessness. That's a valid experience. That's a normal human experience. People go through that. It's just optional. It's one of many possible experiences. Guilt is hell. This should not be how it is. Always points back to me. I should not be how I am. My life should not be how it is, and it's my fault. Guilt always, even if it's, really buried, there's always this implicit personal guilt. It's my fault. My life is hell because of me, because I am flawed, because I made a mistake. But that guilt, that hell, is temporary. Guilt is a natural, reflexive process that does nothing to alter the fundamental innocence of all creations of God. Matthew 5:48 says, "Be perfect just as your source in heaven is perfect." You're created in the image of perfection, as the image of perfection. You're perfect. You always have been. You just made a mistake about labeling yourself as other than perfect. And when I say you're perfect, I mean you're how God created you, because God's the only power, so no one else could have created you. You just took, you just blamed yourself. You took some authority from God. I took some authority from God and said, no, that was me. Oh my God, it was bad what I did. Everything that happens is God's activity, God's creation. On earth, just as in heaven, God's will is done. Not God's will is done occasionally when, conditions are appropriate. This is God's will. What do I mean by this? Anything, whatever's happening, that's God's will. So stop blaming God for ruining your life. God is not ruining your life. God is not ruining your life. That's like saying that a tree is ruining a branch of the tree. A tree cannot ruin the branch of a tree. Like the branch is only alive because of the tree. The branch is the tree. The branch is an activity of the tree. You are an activity of God. The branch is the tree. I am an activity of God. The branch abides in the tree, and the tree abides in the branch. The branch is already the tree. The tree doesn't need to reconnect with the branch, and the branch doesn't need to reconnect with the tree. I don't need to reconnect with God. God is already happening in every activity that is. That's all God's will. God's activity includes, that's all God's will. God's activity includes me and any activities of mine. My learning process, my sinning, my worrying, my frustration, that's all part of the growth process. If you stop condemning some aspect of your life, or if I stop condemning some aspect of my life, my finances, my location, my appearance, my government, my neighbor, well then I can simply recognize with humility whatever God is creating. I just recognize it, rather than making a terrified, arrogant attack on some branch of God's creation, on God. Do not argue with God unless you are attracted to the experience of humility, because humility is what arguing with God will always produce. And then maturity, and then recognition of innocence. Okay, go ahead. If you want, argue with God, fine. It'll just be His activity all along. Anyway, that's all there is.